Okay, welcome to the second hour of SLA and everything you should know about it, and that's in quotes. Okay, so we've covered 3 points earlier. For those of you who weren't there, the 3 points we covered is what's in your head isn't necessarily what you think is there. We talked about representation of language in your head. The second thing we talked about was practice isn't all it's cracked up to be, and we looked at the role of input in language acquisition. And the third thing we talked about was communication is different from mental representation, and we defined communication and then talked about how that develops over time. So now we're going to go on to something different, which is this. Don't automatically blame the first language. And is the following first language interference? When you're a student of French or you're a student of Spanish says the following, Je suis 20 ans, or Yo soy 20 años. So is that first language interference? Yeah. Most of you would say that. I'm hoping that by the end of this point you will say no, or at least not necessarily. Okay? Now why? Because there's a difference between the first language actually influencing development, which is mental representation over time, and the first language influencing communication or strategies for getting ideas across. It's a well-known fact now that learners of languages go through what we call transitional stages of development, or transitional stages of competence, or transitional stages of representation, whatever you want to call it, that are similar to all learners regardless of their first language. I'm going to give you just one example from negation in English, okay? And so we have enough of these that we're satisfied that this is a fact in language acquisition. Okay, so the first stage of negation is the learner just going no plus X. So when you put that learner in spontaneous speech, they'll blurt out no X, like no drink beer. When I used to teach ESL, I would get this all the time. I would tease my Arabic students because most of them were devout and wouldn't drink alcohol. I go, Muhammad, you didn't do your homework. You were drinking beer. No, no drink beer. Okay. Stage 2 is where now we're getting subjects in sentences, and we put a subject in front of that. So we've gone from no drink beer to I no drink beer. So Muhammad, you didn't do your homework. You were drinking last night. Oh no, I know drink beer. Okay, all right. So stage 3 was don't, now alternating with no. So they got this little chunk of language called don't. They don't know it's a dummy verb. They don't know that there's a not attached to it. They don't even know what's in it. They just know don't means no. And so you get alternations between I no drink beer, or he no drink beer, and I don't drink beer, and he don't drink beer. Stage 4, we get the emergence of modals. So that's where we get can and will and would and things like that. Usually can't is the first one. So we get I can't drink beer, I cannot drink beer, and so on. And then it's only after modals creep in and start to get in the system that we see the emergence and final stage acquisition of analyze do. And we get he doesn't drink beer, he does not drink beer, I don't drink beer, I do not drink beer, and so on. Okay, so these are the classic stages, highly attested, non-controversial, and all language learners, regardless of their first language, go through these stages. So the stage 5 is we know it's analyzed because they have does, do, and did, as well as doesn't, didn't, don't, does not, did not, and so on. So that's the difference between stage 5 and stage 3. Modals like can't and will carry meaning. Remember, do does not carry meaning. Do is a dummy verb, right? Do has no meaning. But can and will and should have meaning. Will means future, or some kind of intent or projected intent. Should has some underlying meaning of what? What is it? Obligation or whatever. You can ascribe to these models. So learners latch onto those because they can attach meaning to those. And once they start to analyze can and should and shouldn't and wouldn't and those things, because those occupy the same position of that CP. Remember we were talking about CP earlier, the clause phrase? So the should has to move up just like the do has to move up. The can has to move up just like the do has to move up, and so on. Once they get that in their representation, they are now ready to analyze do, which they've been hearing since the first day. Aside from those stages of learning just one thing, there's also a fact that learners acquire particular inflections and morphemes over time in a certain order, regardless of their first language. So we're taking an example from English because that's a language we all speak. The first thing learners get and get control over is ing. So like he walking. What's he doing? He walking to school. Okay. The next thing they get control over, and by control I mean they get like really good control, like a high degree of accuracy, is the simple past tense. What did he do? Oh, he walked to school. And the last thing they get is walks. For what does he do every day? He walks to school. So they get ing first, that comes in relatively soon. Past tense comes in later, much later. And third person S comes in even later. Sometimes it never comes in at all. Not only does the L1 not alter this order of acquisition, instruction does not alter the order either, or practice. Okay, so whether you're a Spanish, Chinese, French, Arabic, Greek, Swahili, I don't know what, speaker, you get ing before you get ed, you get ed before you get third person s. To be sure, there may be first language influence, not in terms of the stages themselves, but how long you stay in one. So, for example, if we take that first stage of no plus x, and that second stage of subject plus no plus x, and you have Spanish and Mandarin speakers versus French speakers, French has post-verbal negation. So, je mange pas, I eat not, is what we say in French. Whereas Spanish and Mandarin have pre-verbal negation. In Spanish, it's a simple no, and in Chinese, it's bu. So in Chinese, you literally say bu plus verb. Spanish, you say no plus verb. So you get structures in Spanish and Chinese that look like these stages you're going to create anyway. So what happens to Chinese and Mandarin speakers is they'll stay a little longer in stage 1 and 2 compared to French speakers. But French speakers and Mandarin and Spanish speakers will go through these stages no matter what. L1 can influence how long you do something, but it doesn't influence the creation of that stage. That stage is going to be there no matter what. You can't practice your way out of stages. In fact, we have research that you can actually make people regress because you overload them. There is some evidence that the L1 may affect very subtle properties of language, what we call interfaces between different components. Now, you got to remember that language consists of, as I said earlier, syntax, lexicon, morphology, phonology, all those different things. And these systems have to speak to each other. And let me give you an example of an interface between what's called syntax and discourse. Okay, so in Spanish we can say, Juan vio a Roberto después que regresó de Francia. So regresó there means returned with no pronoun, with no he. Okay, so what that sentence means is John saw Robert after he, understood, returned from France. But we can also say this sentence like this in Spanish. Juan vio a Roberto después que él regresó de Francia. We can put the él in there, which means he. So no he or he, they're both grammatical. Question for you. If I asked you, who returned from France? Robert or John? What's your first reaction? If those of you who speak Spanish had a first reaction. Now, we've done research on this, and native speakers of Spanish have a strong tendency when there's no pronoun there for that verb to refer to the subject of the previous clause, Juan. They go 50-50 if there's an él there or an ella. 50% of the time they'll take John, 50% of the time they'll take Robert. So the null subject has a strong preference for antecedents, but the overt pronoun, the él or the ella, does not. Italian is a little stronger. In Italian, it's almost the null takes the subject that came before, and lei prefers to take the non-subject. That's an interface between syntax, whether or not you allow null and overt pronouns, and the discourse. That is, when you have topic change and focus shift and things like that. That's what we're talking about there. These subtle differences that native speakers possess take non-natives exceedingly long to acquire. But guess what? It also takes first language learners exceedingly long to acquire. When does a native-speaking child of Spanish start to get those differences? They first show a difference between interpreting those two sentences around the age of 10. But they're still different from their adult counterparts. It's not till puberty, around 13 or 14, we actually see that their percentages shift and actually are indistinguishable from native speakers. So the onset is around 9 or 10, and then it takes them another 4 years to be like adults in terms of their interpretation of these sentences. So some things just take a long time to get, right? All right. And it could be influenced by your L1. English doesn't have null and overt subject pronouns. In English, we use a different way. And so if you don't have null and overt subject pronouns, that could be the reason why it takes so long. I personally think that's not the reason. I think it's just because it takes so long in your first language anyway. It's just one of those weird things about language, but other people argue it's the first language. I'll let you pick.